Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to Tech Leaders Hub. So good to have you here with us today. It is such a pleasure to be having you here watching our show or just listening to it. Whether you're watching live or the recording, it's super nice that you're spending some time with Tech Leaders Hub today. My guest today is Harlan Beverly, VP of Engineering at Mercado Labs. Harlan, how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing great and so excited to be here.
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited too. Can you remind us where you're kind of calling in from?
Sure, I'm based out in Austin, Texas, in the United States. So it's nice and sunny here. And actually, it's a hot day as usual in
Oh,
Texas
wow.
these days. Over 100 degrees for the last 100 days. It's just a very hot place to be. But it's also hot for as a tech hub. It's Austin, Texas has become like #2 mecca tech hub for tech in the United States. So it's a hot place to be overall.
Wow, I love that segue there. That worked really well. And it's very hard to wrap my head around what you just said because it just got so cold here in Poland. It's like the fall is coming quickly and winter is not going to be far behind, it seems like. And Cesare in the chat is already waving. That's awesome. Hey, Robert, and everyone else watching. Actually, if you're all watching this, let us know that you can see us and you can hear us, okay? That the audio is okay, the video is okay, especially the audio, because this is getting recorded and it's going to be on Spotify, Apple, and Google on our podcast channel later. So it's super important that you let us know about that and let us know where you're calling in from. I imagine some people might be from Poznan, like myself here at the STX Next office. Anyway, in the meantime, Harlan, we're gonna give people a few minutes to still join the session. Maybe they're finishing a meeting or something much less important than this, obviously. In the meantime, as they're joining in, can you tell us who do you hope is going to be joining us today? Who do you think will benefit the most from this session?
Yeah, sure. I mean, really anybody in tech, which I would say mostly leaders. So people who are leaders or want to be leaders, people who want to know how to build great teams, people who want to know how to be successful, in a startup. Those are the people. And then of course developers who need to manage the manager, right? As you're about to hear, I'm a VP of engineering and I have teams. And sometimes my team has to manage me, and we'll talk about that later maybe. But in general, I think this will be useful for anybody who's on a tech team, leads a tech team, interested in startups, or just wants to find some success.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that. And definitely what you mentioned, what I hear usually called managing up, and it's such a crucial skill for anybody's career. No matter how far up you are, managing up is something you constantly have to do. You need to be good at it to advance, certainly. And a lot of comments are rolling in. I'm super happy to see them. For now, everything looks good. Thank you, Robert. Carolina saying loud and clear. And somebody on LinkedIn, I'm sorry, the integration broke, is saying audio video are so far so good. Thank you, dear LinkedIn user, for that. All right, it looks like we're all set to get started. And in the usual Tech Leaders Hub fashion, we're going to get right into valuable content first and talk about your background actually second. So I'm being told LinkedIn user is Samar Shah. So thank you, Samar, for joining us today. So I'm going to ask you, Harlan, if that's okay, the traditional Tech Leaders Hub question. And the question is, what is your number one tip for tech leaders?
I appreciate that question, Kuba. My answer is really about not about the topic today, because I think tech leaders end up making one big mistake over and over and over again. And I say tech leader, I really mainly mean startup leader, because that's what I deal with mostly is startups. And this is it. They kind of overinvest too early, meaning that they decide they have this big vision, right? And so they build and build and build and wait and wait and wait, when really they should build the smallest possible increment and launch that and get feedback from customers sooner. So the term is minimum viable product. It's probably been mentioned many times, but really, even though everybody has heard the term minimum viable product, tech leaders continue to make the same mistake over and over again, which is they want to build every feature, every single possible thing that they can think of at before they're ready to go live and and launch, when really we should be building the minimum thing that they think is necessary to be able to deliver the value, get that out in front of customers, add more features later. And otherwise you've overinvested in probably the wrong things. That's really the key,
Hmm.
is that MVP.
Well, I I think this is one of the most important concepts that you can keep in mind as a leader. MVP, going out there and getting feedback on what you're building, actually getting feedback and closing the feedback loop in many different areas has become kind of a staple of Tech Leaders Hub. It's mentioned in many ways, in many contexts on this show, and I think there's a reason why it's a crucial component to success. Since we're talking about the startup environment, I wanted to ask you, do you think maybe there's potentially a conflict between this kind of approach and what VCs are actually expecting when you're seeking investment? On the one hand, you're talking about building something fairly small so you can test your assumptions. On the other, I have a feeling when you're pitching to investors, you need to tell them about something big and exciting in order for them to invest. So is there like a method to be able to have both here, or am I completely off track?
No, you're on track. And there is a method. The method is to have a vision, a big vision. Investors, especially venture capital investors, they want to see the big vision. But that means a roadmap. It doesn't mean an executed, finished product with all of the bells and whistles. It means to have a proper roadmap in place where eventually you're going to get to someplace amazing. Where you need to start, though, is with customer validation. Because what's interesting is those same VCs who want the big vision, they also want to see customer traction and early customer traction. So so the way to do that is focus on this core small MVP, your core beachhead market. And then once you've got a little traction, then you're going to be able to take that traction, combine it with this amazing vision and say, here's where we are, here's where we're going, invest in us and help us get there.
That's very interesting. There's two things that pique my curiosity here. First, this is a phrase that I'm hearing for the first time. Beachhead market. Can you expand on that?
Sure. A beachhead market is like, it's not like the big market that you think your product will address. It's actually like a subset, a small, tiny niche market that are going to be like the one that you initially go out to. And the reason is usually because they're either A, really easy to find, or B, hopefully also they really care the most. So think early adopters or people who have the problem more than others, or people who are like really more energetic or risk they're willing to take risk. And so like that's the beachhead market. It's your very first customer set. It's not your ultimate customer set. Remember, you have this product vision, but it's like the first core one, the first one that you're really going to focus on.
This reminds me of Facebook, actually, because the story there is that initially, I think it was college students that were on there, and only after that they expanded to most of humanity, right? So I suppose it's a similar.
It wasn't just college students; it was just his school. I think it was just one school that you were allowed to do. I think it was Harvard. I'm not sure. I don't remember which school it was, but it was like just one school, and that's it. And then that's perfect because it had both things. It had college students who really wanted to be more social, but it was also very easily marketed. They could reach those customers very easily. And that's like the best of both worlds.
Excellent. And the second thing I wanted to latch on to, you were mentioning customer traction. And I'm wondering, is there a way to show this traction without having a product actually out there?
That's a great question. I know we're going to talk about my book later on, but I do have a book. It's called Navigating Your Way to Startup Success. And in that book, I describe just exactly that, the way in which you can show customer traction, maybe without even actually having a product. And the answer is yes. And the way to do it is really not that complicated. You have to get a proxy for sales. So the proxy would be, for example, signups, registrations, emails, pre-orders would be a great proxy, right? If you can get pre-orders, or even just like a down payment or anything that's more than just a bunch of people looking at a website. If customers are willing to put in their personal information, for example, it's a good proxy for sales and shows interest by the customers and customer traction.
Yeah, it shows that they're invested at least enough to punch in their personal info, and people are more and more precious about that. Well, precious. They're guarding their personal information more and more, and that shows that they might be interested in the product when it launches. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so well, we expanded a lot on this number one tip, but that's because it's honestly something that I really love to discuss. MVP, being lean, getting feedback early, feedback often. I say it often on calls, so you picked a good one, I think. Anyway, so as we build up to the topic of building multiple successful startups, building well-balanced teams, let's talk about, I mean, the way the title is structured for this talk is actually no coincidence. You are a person who built multiple successful startups, Harlan. So why don't you tell us about, how this story unfolded, a little bit about your background for people who don't know you, and obviously about your newest venture, Mercado Labs. We would love to hear more about that.
Of course, sure. So I would consider myself a serial entrepreneur. It means that I've had many startups, and part of the reason is not because I'm successful at it, but I am, but mostly because I love it. It's like a roller coaster. It's so fun to ride, and I love startups. So I got the bug for startups while I was working at Intel, where I was a chip designer, and I wanted to know why projects got accepted and why projects got canceled. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. Decided to go to MBA school, and so I got an MBA. And while I was there, I had an idea for a startup, which was a networking device. So I'm big into video games, and I was like, hey, why don't we make a network device that made games play faster online? And I had a way to do it. I had an idea of how to do this. And so I pitched the idea to Intel, actually, and they said, that's interesting, but it's not big enough market for us, right? The gaming's not big enough. I know this was 2004. So
yeah,
they were like,
what a thing to
okay.
say. Yeah.
World of Warcraft only had 10 million subscribers at that point. So that's not big enough for Intel.
Wow.
They regret that decision because later on they ended up buying the company, but that's another story. So in fact, they allowed me to start the company on the side. They give me a written letter saying that this idea was my own and not Intel's, which was actually really helpful when I went to raise money. That company, I started that company. I ended up raising $20 million for that business. It was called Bigfoot Networks. And we made the Killer Network card, the world's first video game network device. It is now inside almost every Dell, Alienware, almost every computer actually has the Killer Network chip, which is
I've got one in mine too. My personal machine. I've got that too. Wow, amazing.
Yep. I built that. I designed that. That was my company, my idea, and it was a lot of learning through that process. A lot of failing my way to success, I guess. But ultimately, Bigfoot was a success, and rolled that into my next startup. So I took some money from that one and started my next one, which is a social networking company. That was super hot. Then I rolled that one into another startup, which was a video game company because I love games. And then I rolled that one into another startup, which was a recipe website. I also love food. Who doesn't love food? Had that one, and then and keep going. And 6 startups later, I've had one massive failure. We can talk about it later. It wasn't massive. It was just one startup that failed, and I had 5 exits, so 5 successful acquisitions. And then most recently, I became part of Mercado Labs, which is my latest one, and we are looking to change the way stuff gets shipped overseas. Currently, it is a mess. It's very, very complicated. It's antiquated. Everything is pen and paper. And so we're trying to make everything digital, and we're making the world's first truly global platform for importing and shipping and purchasing and ordering and making it all in one place. So it's super exciting product and solution that we have.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That is such a wild journey. I'm not even sure, where to continue on from here. Robert in the comments is saying that he's also got the Killer Network chip in his MSI. My laptop is an MSI too, actually. So that tracks. So, wow. Obviously, that's a huge track record, Harlan, and it makes me excited just hearing about it and hearing about it. It seems like there's like a lot of momentum in what you're talking about. That one success carries into the other, and obviously you learned a lot along the way. So let me try and phrase my next question this way. Out of all of the things that you did to make these startups a success, what do you think was the most important factor, the most important thing that you did that other tech leaders or startup leaders can also do that helped so many of these startups, well, almost all of them, succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's about having the right team, having the right partners, having the right people on your side, because at the end of the day, you can only be successful if the people around you are the same and are the same energy and put into it what you put into it. If it's just you and you're the only one working super hard, it's going to be very difficult to find success. You've got to build a great team around you, whether that's an executive team, whether it's a tech team, whatever the team is. Everybody needs to be at the same level and putting in the same amount of effort and passion that you have. And that's hard to find.
Hmm.
Finding people with the same passion as the founder is very difficult, but it is possible. And if you can do that, then the people that love it and love what they do, they don't have to even love, they don't have to love the startup idea, but they have to love what they do. Like for example, let's say I have a company that's doing, let's say, like some kind of complicated artificial intelligence technology, and
Hmm.
I want to hire a marketing person. I don't need a marketing person who loves AI, right? I need a marketing person who loves marketing.
I
That's what I
see.
want. I want someone who's just passionate about marketing, whatever it is, they love it. Same thing with sales. I don't need a salesperson who's a genius at I need them to understand the market, but I want them to be passionate about sales. I want them to be like that. They read books about sales. They watch podcasts about sales. That sales is what they love. Same thing with
Yeah.
engineers, and especially engineers. I need engineers who love what they do, who love the languages that they work in, who participate in open source because it's part of the community, who watch podcasts like this one. That's what I
There
need,
you go.
because I want them to care about their, I want them to be experts in their craft. I want craftsmen. I want people who love what they do.
Yeah, this actually meshes very well with what I heard when I was joining STX Next. Funnily enough, when Matthew Harris was bringing me on board, he said that, paraphrasing here, but he said that he can teach the domain, right? The domain of IT, and help me and others joining the team to learn, to differentiate front end from back end and Java from JavaScript. That is teachable, but you can't really teach, or you can't do it easily. You can't teach the craft, right? And you can't force a person to be passionate about the craft. So this, what you're saying, really tracks for me. It makes perfect sense. So now the kind of obvious next question then is, how do you actually check for that when you're looking for people? How do you find people who have got that passion?
Kuba, you're not going to like this answer, because you won't like this answer because it's controversial.
Ah,
And the answer is, and I'll be honest, this is what I do, and so the secret's going to be out after I announce this, but I hire fast and I fire fast. What it means
I
is
see.
I cannot tell if you're passionate about your craft, or if you know what you're doing, or you're good at your doing. Even programmers, even a programming test, I can't tell how passionate you are, how good you're going to be at your job. And so instead, what I do is I make sure that you meet the minimum requirements for the job, what I'm trying to accomplish, that you have the skill that I think that you have. I do my best to assess that you're passionate, but some people, they're just look more, they don't show the passion. Like if I only hired people that are passionate, then I'd only hire type A people, and that's not a good business to run. So what I have to do is
There you go.
is I need to show that they're competent, that they are intelligent, that they're alert, and then I bring them on the team. I see how they are. I see what they do. I see how they dig in, and they really enjoy what they're doing. I check in every month, sometimes more, to find out how happy they are. Do they love what they do? And if it's not working out, I fire them as quickly as I can, because it's just better off for everybody if the person's not happy, or doesn't fit with the team, or isn't willing to put in the energy that everybody else is putting in. You have to get rid of that person, because everybody else sees that person is not putting in the same amount of energy, and then what happens is everybody around them puts in less energy, and it just drains the life out of the team, and I have to fire those people very quickly. So and energy doesn't have to be like I am, like extroverted energy. It can be energy on the keyboard. It can be energy in emails. It can be energy in the output of the work, or the
Yeah.
contributions that you make. But that has to be there. And if it's not there, the team knows it. Everybody knows it. The person brings down the rest of the team, and so I fire those people quickly.
Wow. Amazing. I mean, it's maybe not typical to what we hear on Tech Leaders Hub, but this approach, it actually reminds me of what you said for your number one tip. This is also kind of an approach of, starting small, starting early, and then getting feedback on what works. And sometimes the feedback is going to be that it's not working out. So let me maybe rephrase the question a little bit then. So let's say you've got this person on board and you're checking in. How do you check if things are actually working out or not? Are is it those things that you mentioned, the not just the energy in terms of personality, but also in terms of output? Is there something more to it? Is there anything specific that you do?
I try to make things quantitative, which is
Hmm.
easy to do for engineering and QA, because in those fields, we're using Scrum or some other, or Kanban, or some other technique, and I'm able to measure velocity output in terms of story points or tickets completed or whatever. I can measure output very objectively, and I can compare that to other team members, and I know that a normal ramp up period is, after 2 months you should be contributing at your level, and if you're not, there's a problem, and hopefully I detect that problem sooner. So I try to get as quantitative as I can. But then the qualitative side is about the feedback from the peers and understanding, okay, what are your peers saying about you? Are you helping the team? Are you bringing fresh ideas? Are you contributing more than just the tickets, more than just the work that you're doing? Are you helping your teammates? Are you, so I look at what the peers are also saying. So I kind of take a 360 approach where, I observe things, I see what your output is, and I hear from the teammates. And at the end of the day, everybody thinks that, you're the one who's Kuba, you're the one who's causing the problems on the team. I'm going to have to let you go. I'm just kidding, obviously, but that's kind of what I have to do. I wouldn't say it that way, but at the end of the day, like having to understand, like if everybody sees that you're the one that's not contributing to the level and you don't seem to be bringing the passion or the energy to the job, the number one signal for me is tools. If you're not passionate about the tools of your craft and keeping them sharp, it's a problem. So for example, if you don't know how to use VS Code, I'm sorry, you've got problems. Like you need to focus on your tools. You need to learn that tool a little bit better. If you have problems with Git, like you need to learn Git. Like it is the number one tool in the craft of software development. And I want people that are passionate about keeping their tools sharp, finding the best tools, Docker, whatever it is. I want people to learn the tools and the craft and focus on the craft, not just the output, right? I'm going to get better as a TypeScript developer. I'm going to use types because it's what TypeScript is about. And that's what and if you don't feel that way, if you're just like, TypeScript, just another JavaScript, I'll just, whatever, I'll just put any, if you know what I'm talking about, hopefully developers on the channel know what I'm talking about. That's not really passionate about your craft. TypeScript was evolved to make the language better, to allow us to catch bugs sooner in our code because we're using typing. And if you're not devoted to that craft, then you're not a fit for my team. You're going to be fired.
Okay, I see. Wow. I liked what you talked about, especially since you talked about like clear, distinctive signals. What you mentioned about tools makes a lot of sense to me, and I find that the most passionate people I see, they go on Slack and they take the time out of their day to share like a new hotkey that they found or a new functionality or some way to simplify their workflow, and they share it with others. They teach too as much as they learn. I feel like it's a nice way to identify the people who've got that passion and drive. Certainly, I did want to ask though, because that seems to be like one element of this puzzle that we're trying to solve, called building a successful team. And first of all, I wanted to ask, this applies, you mentioned building the leadership team and the engineering team. I imagine this tip applies to both, right?
Yes, it does. And the reason I mentioned that is because I've been both CEO, I've been CTO, I've been VP of engineering, I've been the founder CEO many times. So in different frames, different contexts, it's still the same, right? Even a salesperson should be passionate about tools. As an example, they need to be up and they need to love Salesforce. When if they hate Salesforce, they better have an alternative that they love as well.
Yeah.
And they need to know it. Like you shouldn't just rely on someone else to deal with Salesforce. Keeping track of all of your leads and all that stuff in sales is like essential. Like it's the main thing of sales. So if they don't love their tools, then they're not the right fit for me. So yeah, I think it applies to really anything you're trying to hire at the, at any level.
Yeah, that's really inspiring, honestly. When I think of people, and this was me also at certain points in my career, people wearing many hats, or going into many sub-disciplines. It's also something you can apply to your own self-development. What is the one area out of all the areas you're in where you really are passionate about the details, passionate about the tools? It's probably worthwhile to follow that. But anyway, that's just a personal observation. So on the other hand, on the one hand, we talked about finding people with passion. Certainly, that's one element of building a successful team. On the other, we titled this whole talk talking about well-balanced teams. So I was wondering if you could maybe start unpacking that a little bit. What do we mean when we say well-balanced team, and why is that so important to build successful startups and just successful organizations in general?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I know. So I think I'm going to go down the tech side more because that's kind of my role right now, VP of engineering.
Of course.
And on the tech side, what it means is having the right balance between all the different types of developers that you might involve, and QA.
Mhm.
So what I mean by well balanced is what I mean is that you need to have the right mix of teammates. So for example, if you've got 10 developers and only one person doing QA, is that really a good balance? Can that QA person keep up with the 10 developers? Or are they going to become the bottleneck? So when I
Mhm.
think about building well-balanced team, what I want to make sure is that as I grow my company, let's say it's just 2 people at the beginning, that's not a big deal. But as I grow my company, I need to have the right mix of talent so that I don't
Mhm.
create bottlenecks in my company or in my tech team. So at the company level, like for example, if I've got so many engineers and nobody in sales, that's a problem. Like I need to invest a little bit more in sales, because building is not the path to success. You have to build and sell at the same time.
Of
Same
course.
thing with marketing. If I have too many salespeople and not enough marketing leads, maybe I need to invest a little bit more in marketing. Where's the bottleneck in my company? Now, right now, I'm a VP of engineering, so my responsibility is all engineering in the entire department of what we're building. And so, in that case, I'm not focused so much on sales, but I am focused on making a very efficient and effective engineering team. And to do that, I want to have the proper balance between QA and developers. And within developers, as you know, Kuba, sometimes there's this thing that's called front end and back end developers, which is
Yes.
another thing to balance. So if indeed I have front end developers, back end developers, or worst case, like I only code in, I don't know, the Node, and I don't do any Angular. I only code in like Fortran, and I don't code in any other language. Or like if I have like very specific talent skills only, then that's even more that I have to balance. So and then of course QA, and if I have only QA who can only do manual tests and some QA who can only do automated tests, that's more that I have to balance. So to build a well
Mhm.
balanced team, I have to balance all those things. That's 5 things to balance, and I don't know where the bottleneck is. That makes it too, as a startup, it's too hard, because I can't be like, well, I have to have this much work for front end, this much work for back end, this much work for
Mhm.
my one guy who can only do Node, this much work for my one guy who can only do Python, this much work for my one girl who can only do automated tests. That's so much complexity on a small team. It's just not
Uh-huh.
tenable or feasible. So my approach, my trick for building well-balanced teams, number one, I have 3. Number one is don't allow any of that crap. I want a developer or a QA. A developer should always
Okay.
be a full stack developer. And if they're not a full stack developer, they'll either become one, and I'll give them the space to become one, or I will fire them. Remember, fire fast. So it just is how it is. You're going to become, you're either you know, obviously I'm hiring for full stack, obviously, but sometimes someone says they're full stack and then really they're a curmudgeon. They come on the team. I'll only work front end. Guess what? You're fired. And I've done that. I've done that multiple times. I mean,
Wow.
on the day that the first time that they push back, I'll only do front end. I'm sorry, it's not going to work out. It's time for you to go. Pack your stuff, go home, because
Wow. So
that's not
you
a
really mean
startup.
fast. Yeah.
I mean fast. A startup cannot survive people who are belligerent, because that's belligerence ultimately, and B, it's just too hard to balance front end and back end while you're trying to deliver value. Right? A startup has to deliver value quickly to the customer, and people who can't work as a team and do full stack approach, even if you're not very good at back end, let's say, who cares? At least you can contribute and try and learn and get better at your team. And that's what I need. I need people who have that spirit of, I'm going to get better. I understand we got to be full stack. I know why we need to be full stack, and I'm willing to do it. So it's like my number one pet peeve. I need people who are willing to be full stack developer or full stack QA. So I don't want QA who only do, let's say, for example, automation, or who only do a manual test, I don't need that. Like, I don't need that. I don't have space on my team to do that. Later on, maybe a company gets big enough and I'll have a department that does automation, but I'll never
Uh-huh.
be part of that company, because that will drive me crazy. I prefer a much smaller company. So I need QA also who are full stack QA, who can do all of it, who can do API testing, with Postman, who can do automated testing if needed with Selenium or whatever tool, and who can also do manual testing, whatever is needed to get the job done. I want full stack developers and full stack QA. The best part of that is I only have to balance 2 things. I only have one bottleneck. It's either going to be my full stack developers or my full stack QA. I have not 5
Right.
bottlenecks to manage, only 2. And based
Yeah.
on that, I can optimize.
Wow. So this reminds me of something, and this is going to be a little bit far out, right? But the way this makes a lot of sense to me is that when you think about it, you're building an organization from the ground up. It's a little bit about how, like I said, this is going to be a little bit far out, but bear with me. It's a little bit how about how human civilization developed in general. We started out; it was all generalists. You had to be able to do everything because otherwise you wouldn't survive. Now, everybody's specializing and they only take on a certain part of work. Like, I'm only a marketer, I'm only in sales, or people get super specialized. Like, I only do TikTok videos for B2B brands between 300 and 1,000 people, or whichever, right? However they position themselves. But when you think about it, you're building a startup. It's like you're building your own mini civilization from the start. So you need people who can put on a lot of different hats. Like I said, this is just the direction my mind went in. But this is just to say that this makes perfect sense to me. And this is number one in terms of building well-balanced teams. I really wonder about number two and number three.
Sure. And I don't want to come across this. I probably come across as some kind of tyrant. I mean, I really hate letting people go. Just to be clear, like it's not a fun thing by any stretch. It always feels good when you're done, but ultimately, it's about attitude more than anything else, right? Even if you're not full stack skilled, it's about attitude. So number two technique is to have one bottleneck, and actually, what it means is in any system, there should only be one place that you need to that controls the flow of the system. In other words, if let's say I have exactly 10 developers and exactly 10 QA, and sometimes it's developers who get more done than the QA can handle, and sometimes the QA is way ahead and the developers can't build enough stuff for the QA to test and get live. And by the way, DevOps is another department that's sometimes included in this. But ultimately, like if I don't know where my bottleneck is, I can't make accurate predictions about my Scrum. So I can't make accurate predictions about what I'm going to get done at any given time, because it could be that QA is too loaded. It could be that Dev is too loaded. So what I want in any system, and again, thinking about the engineering department as a system, there should be one bottleneck. If it was the entire organization, it should also be one bottleneck. It should be like just engineering or just sales. Ideally, it's sales. Sales should always be the ultimate bottleneck in any organization. If not, then you're underutilizing you should get more investment, because it means you're getting more sales than you can keep up with. It's a great problem to have, but it's not one that is normal for a startup for certain. So having one bottleneck consistently, and I do that intentionally. I literally intentionally have more developers than I have QA, because I want QA to be the bottleneck. I want QA to be the one that is not able to keep up, and we know exactly how much stuff QA can get done, and because they can only get a certain number of points done, and so that ultimately is what limits the system. So I know that if I want to get more done, I can add some more QA, but I don't want to add too much QA, because then the bottleneck would move to developers. And I want to avoid that. By the way, I've done it the other way. I've done it both ways, where the developers are the limiting factor. And there's some argument that makes more sense. If the developers are more expensive, then they should be the one that is the bottleneck in the system. And so I'll intentionally, in that situation, I would intentionally have more QA than I need, which means QA should be partially idle. And idle is good. In a bottleneck theory, idle is actually good, because it means that they have capacity they have extra capacity, so that the developers are actually the intentional bottleneck in that flow. So having one bottleneck as you're building a team, focusing on having, okay, we know we're going to have more developers than we have QA, or we know we're going to have more QA than we have developers, is really, really critical. And you don't want a perfect balance, because then it kind of moves around too much.
Yeah, I understand that completely. And really, you introduced me to this concept even when we were having the conversation before the stream. We always do one prep call before we go live with our guests, kind of revealing the workflow of Tech Leaders Hub here. And this concept really stuck with me for weeks, thinking about, okay, so where are the bottlenecks in my system, the marketing content system? How can I manipulate them? And being intentional about the bottlenecks. I feel like that's one of the largest insights here, is that you design the system in a way that you know in advance where the bottlenecks are. So I have one follow-up question about this, but before we get to that, we actually have a question from the audience, and I try to prioritize those. So Cesare, our very own, has got a question for you, Harlan. What's more difficult in your opinion, front end or back end? Let's tackle that before we get to the rest of the discussion. Oh, I should keep it up. Yeah, there you go.
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, the question's kind of complicated because in terms of actual coding, it sort of depends on what your background, right? It's not like one is better than the other or harder than the other. It just depends on what you learned first and what your passion is ultimately. In terms of trying to hire, well, the hardest one to hire is someone who has both. And in fact, that's what I'm always looking for. That's the gem. That's the jewel. Usually people tilt one way or another. They tilt more front end or they tilt more back end. But my ideal hire is someone who's equally good at both and equally loves both front end and back end web development. And specifically, we're talking about web development here, because that to me is the ultimate hire, and that's the hardest one to find and the hardest one to learn, because you have to know kind of two systems, but that's ultimately the best. If I had to force myself to answer the question, I would say probably it's harder to find good back-end people, because back-end already encompasses more than just one language. Usually back-end also includes database architecture, network topology and knowledge, sometimes DevOps. So if I had to say one is slightly harder than the other, I would say backend. But ultimately, I want people who are full stack and who love full stack, and more importantly, who love the idea of contributing to the bottom line of the company and creating value for the end user. And to do that, you have to be full stack.
Awesome. Okay, I like that you did force yourself to answer the question, but you're sticking to your philosophy here. So thank you, Tzade, for challenging us with that question. Keep them coming. Anybody else? Any comments in the chat? You don't only have to ask questions, right? If you agree with something, leave a comment. If you have a thought to add, leave a comment. We love to see them. And before we get to the third element of building well-balanced teams, I wanted to ask you, you were talking a lot about kind of monitoring what's happening within your workflow. And I got really curious about that. So, but what do you mean when you say that, you're watching how much dev is getting done versus how much QA is getting done? How do you actually monitor this work? Do you have a dashboard? Is it a matter of tickets waiting in a certain status on Jira? I'm trying to kind of visualize this in practical terms. How do you usually structure that?
Well, I would be a hypocrite if I didn't say that I'm passionate about management tools, because I am, right? I'm a manager, and as a result, I am passionate about management tools. So I love Jira. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I'm working on it. Nobody can be an expert in something that changes every month or so, which it does, by the way. But I'm really passionate about Jira as a tool, and not just Jira, other workflow tools as well, and automation tools, and pretty much I love tools overall. But why I mention that is because Jira and Scrum are the two tools that software development managers need to be passionate and know a lot about, because that's going to give you the insight. If you understand Scrum process, Scrum philosophy, Scrum methodology, or Kanban, or whatever you're using as a methodology. I prefer Scrum, but there's nothing wrong with Kanban. I would say if you're not doing agile, then you need to go back to management school, because it's proven that it's the better approach in software. I'm not at all opinionated, Kuba. Just so you know, I have no strong opinions whatsoever. But
yeah, I can see that.
But it's Scrum or die. It's Scrum or die. So I'd say Scrum is the way to go. And the best thing about Scrum is it's got built-in assessment, right? You can look at velocity. You can look at cycle time, which is the latest fad and the thing that I pay attention to the most. And so, for example, I want to optimize cycle time. What that means is that when a ticket is started, meaning that I've got a backlog, right? And the ticket gets started to when it's been merged or ready for release, or in some cases released. But for us, it means it's been merged. That means the work has been all the way from started all the way through the QA process. We have an extensive QA process, and code reviewed and actually merged. That's to me, that's the cycle time that I care about the most. And usually the bottleneck of that cycle time is in QA. So the developer can often finish their work within one day, and then it sits in a queue waiting for QA. QA then pulls it from the queue, gets the work done, and then moves it on to like regression analysis, because we have to do regression to make sure nothing else broke. And then finally it gets ready for merge, and then it gets merged. And so I'm looking at each of those phases and seeing how much time each ticket spends in each phase. And in my system, where I want QA to be the bottleneck, I remember it's an intentional bottleneck. What it means is it should be spending more time either waiting for QA or in QA than it does in development in general.
Right.
And that I should always have tickets in waiting for QA, because my developers are not the bottleneck. My QA is. And but ultimately, I know that I need a little bit more QA if like that bottleneck becomes untenable. If I want to increase velocity on my team, I know that I just need to add another QA resource, and I'll get more velocity because they'll be able to pull more of the work that developers are trying to get through the system. So that's kind of like the basic idea of cycle time and analysis. And Jira has all the tools built in. If you just spend the time to look through their reports and analysis tools, they have every single thing that I'm just talking about. You can look at it to the minute, to the ticket, by the user, by the developer, by the QA person. You can get all that data.
That is excellent and so clear. I'm glad I asked the question, because now I can really visualize what you look at to actually put this system that you've got, this approach that you've got, into practice. So thank you for illuminating that. Speaking of illuminating things, we do have a question coming in from Mariusz here. Let's highlight it, read it, and try and address it. Mariusz is saying bottleneck theory. What is that? Is that related to the theory of constraints? What would you say?
Absolutely. It is the theory of constraints, which Eliyahu Goldratt is the author. He's got a very famous book I recommend all managers, and maybe even people who just want to learn or love this stuff. It's called The Goal, and the author is Goldratt with 2 T's, Goldratt. He's the inventor of the theory of constraints, and I guess modern management theory, which includes Scrum and Agile. And the idea of this bottleneck, deprecating the system to one bottleneck, is part of the theory of constraints. And that's 100% right on. Awesome that he identified that Mariusz identified that. I'm really impressed.
Okay, great. So thank you, Mariusz, for the question even more. And yeah, it's also allowed us to review this recommendation. The book is called The Goal, you said. I'm going to actually look it up.
Well, there's another book called Theory of Constraints, but The Goal is the better book. It's very short. It's actually a fiction story about a management professor, which, by the way, I'm also a management professor. So anyway, it's super interesting because he teaches his students about the factory operations in this case through analogy, and the analogy is of these boys who are hiking through the woods, and they've got some slow kids and they got some fast kids, and when they let them go in random order, the fast kids pass the slow kids, and then everybody's just waiting at the end for the slow kid to catch up. But when they put the slow kid in front and made everybody else follow the slow kid, turns out everybody stayed together and they made it to the end all together. And that kind of inspired this. The book goes into much more interesting detail about this and kind of the formation of this theory of constraints. And Goldratt is the author of The Goal. It's a really good book.
Okay, I like it when the books do that. When they are, I mean, it's a non-fiction kind of topic, but they actually tell it through a story. Those really stick with you.
Yes.
Another one that comes to mind is like Who Moved My Cheese, right? It's one of the classics, a very short one, but it really sticks with you when you read it, especially for the first time. Mariusz is saying, thanks, Harlan. Thank you, Mariusz, again. All right. With no more questions coming in, it's high time we get to the third element. You did mention 3. So the third element of building well-balanced teams. To summarize, the first one was that developers should be developers, full stack developers, and QA should be QA, also full stack QA. And the second one was to only have one bottleneck in the system intentionally. So what's the third element?
Now, I have to preface this with saying that this is not an advertisement for STX Next, but I do love STX Next. I've hired STX Next in 3 startups, actually coming on 4. So, and I've recommended STX Next many times, and there's 2 reasons why. And it's related to tip number 3 or well-balanced teams number 3. To build a well-balanced team, I believe you need to have a good mix of full-time, like software development, and contractors. So employees and contractors, having a good mix of employees and contractors is essential. And there's a reason why, because obviously a startup has a limited amount of money, right? We only have so much funds, and hiring international contractors or contractors in other countries or contractors who are much more cost efficient, it saves you a lot of money and can be really effective. Like, you can get a lot of bang for your buck, a lot of output for your dollar, but it has to be managed properly, and it has to be balanced with full-time employees at the right mix of employee to contractor. And if it's all contractor, you maybe have seen this. It can become a mess. There's nobody watching. There's nobody managing. There's nobody leading. There's nobody really kind of like making sure that they understand the whole system, because contractors can come and go. It happens. And it's very different. I mean, employees can come and go too, but there needs to be some kind of like guiding light, guiding principles, and you need employees for that. But at the same time, the contractors can really be a force multiplying effect, because they can put their heads down, they can work 24-hour cycle, right? Because you work during one time zone, they work in a different time zone. That can really be effective. So having the right, first of all, hiring international contractors like STX Next, which I've hired 3 times and absolutely love working with, and but also having the right amount of employees to manage that, balance that out, is really important, because your employees are more connected to the product, we're more connected to the company, whereas the developers are more connected to the contractors are more connected to the code and their craft, which is good. So if now that you know all my secrets, you know that I want people who love their craft and who are full stack, which is why I love STX Next, because for the most part, your team are all full stack developers or full stack willing, and that means I can train them, and that's great. And they are also focused on their craft. It's all about the tools, the technologies, coding the right way, defensive programming, having good architectural style. So you combine that. That's some features that I want. But obviously, you're never going to become experts in supply chain, that Mercado does. You don't know how, for example, the international shipping logistics works in the United States. You'll never know that. You don't even live in the United States. So that's what I need my employees to help be the guiding light, to help understand what we're really trying to do, and to manage, and to honestly to manage code review, because I want to make sure, and this is not the case for STX, but I want to make sure that every piece of code gets looked at by an employee. It's really important to me that the code review is done by employees, because that way there's no miscommunication, there's no mistake, there's nothing that's going to accidentally, oh, I didn't realize you wanted this, right? Well, okay, we have our code review process for that. So the third tip is to building well-balanced teams is utilizing international contractors in the right way, and that is in a balanced way. What is the perfect ratio? I would love to hear other people's thoughts on that. I don't know what the perfect ratio is. I can tell you what has worked for me in the past is about 50-50, 50% employees, 50% contractors. But I'm always looking to push the envelope and have more contractors, because obviously they're less expensive than employees. But 50-50 has been a perfect mix, with the lead developer always being an employee. I need my lead developer to always be an employee, so that they're responsible for the architecture and the code review.
Oh, so I mean, a lot to address here, but first of all, I wanted to say thank you for everything you said about STX Next just there. It's, honestly, it's been a while since we had one of our clients on the show, and I kind of forgot that these moments happen. They always make me very happy on a personal level to hear something like that on the call on Tech Leaders Hub. So thank you for all the kind words. And it is true that I was meaning to ask about the ratio. You did say 50-50, so just to make sure, does that mean like one employee to one like FTE contractor? I'm not using that correctly. So like one full-time employee to one full-time contractor?
Yeah, that's right. And it's also worth mentioning, Kuba, that I don't believe in hiring project work. And I've had many bad experiences with having outsourcing companies do contract work. I don't believe in it. I think it's a huge mistake. It's basically giving up on your own product, giving up on your own belief in your own team. And it's the opposite of having a 50-50 balance, right? If I'm saying, here's the project, go and do it, like I'm basically 100% contract. And I'm telling you, I promise you, it's a recipe for disaster. In my opinion, especially at the startup, you need to be more involved in the development of your product. You can't just say, here's the requirements, go and build it. What you're going to get back is those requirements, and it's not going to be what you wanted, because you cannot write the requirements in a way that allows for that project to be built the way you think it will be built. It just won't happen. You've got to be involved every sprint. You've got to be watching every sprint, the release every sprint. And really, you need your tech team involved too. You need to have at least one engineer. And I have done this. I have been the one and only engineer and I've had 6 contractors. So that's not a 50-50. It wasn't ideal. It was difficult for me to keep up with it. And I ended up hiring more employees, because honestly, it's just difficult to keep up. And the amount of help that happens with someone who's here in the US who understands the business that we're trying to build, being available to talk to the international contractors and help them understand what it is you're actually trying to do. You can't do that with 1 to 6. You need to have closer to 50-50, in my opinion. And that's kind of why I try to keep that balance.
Okay, right. So that's what I like about this, is that it's really actionable, right? And honestly, this is something that even I'm thinking about for my budget for 2023. Obviously, it's marketing full-time employees and marketing contractors too. But just the thought of Harlan is saying 50-50 is the ideal to strive for, that is giving me a lot of thoughts about what I have already on my budget list. And certainly a lot of the other leaders watching and listening will definitely have some thoughts about that as well. Awesome. Wow. So I feel like we've built a really good picture here of what needs to go into building this well-balanced team. We defined it very well. And, if you have any follow-up questions about that, watchers and listeners, I encourage you to ask them. I did want to do a little bit of a sidetrack, though. Well, maybe not a sidetrack, but when we were promoting the session in the copy, the text that was advertising it, we did touch upon one more thing. And that thing is Agile. Specifically, we kind of promised our audience to talk about how you can apply Agile outside of engineering to make the whole company move faster. So I thought, since I feel like we covered most of what we wanted to cover within the subject of well-balanced teams, let's try and give something extra to our audience here and talk also about that. You mentioned Agile is best, and if not, get educated on why. So we already have established that. So what do you mean by applying Agile outside of engineering? Could you kind of unpack this whole thing for us?
Yeah, I mean, the core of Agile is really about being flexible and responding to real customer behavior. And if there are two things we're trying to avoid, and every department should avoid this. Over planning too far into the future is number one. Like if you're planning about next year, or which conferences you're going to go to next year or the year after that, it's probably not the right span of planning. You should be planning shorter cycles, and ultimately that behooves you to do this, because what if next year that conference is canceled, or next year that conference isn't the conference, or you find out that this year the conference didn't deliver the results. So there's two things. Number one is shortened planning cycles for everything that you do. And number two is better measurement capability for every output that you have. So let's go with that conference example. So let's say you're planning, you're thinking about, you got a conference coming up, you go to the conference. How do you know the conference was successful? What was your metrics of success? What were you measuring about the conference to know that it was worth your investment in time and money? Remember, time is money. So you had to spend time there, you had to spend money to go there. Like, is it worth it? That measurement capability should be what drives your decision. So you can't plan more than a year in advance, because you need to see what the results were from the conference. Maybe when you finish the conference and you've processed the data, you can say, hey, the ROI was good. Let's go ahead and sign up for next year. That would be the most aggressive planning I would do. But even then, I would probably wait, because here's the thing. What if the conference 3 weeks from now or 2 months from now is better from a metrics point of view, and you have a fixed budget, right? So maybe instead of booking the conference next year right away, you should wait till you see which was the best conference, and then book the conference for next year, whichever one was best, maybe, and then book the conference for next year based on your budget and knowing which ones were best. So it's about knowing the output and shortening your planning cycles so that you're not planning so far in advance. And that's for marketing, that's for sales, for everything.
Very interesting. So I wonder if there's a way to actually have this shorter planning cycle, but also accommodate. I mean, this is going to be, I suppose, for my personal experience here. But sometimes you're asked to present a yearly budget, right? So a plan of activities for a whole year. So is it possible, when you're asked to do that, to still incorporate this thinking of shorter cycles? Or again, I find myself asking the question of, is there a way to balance these, or to have your cake and eat it in this sense?
Kuba, you have to fire your CEO, because but let me tell you why. They don't understand Agile. If they're asking for all of your plans for next year, they're forcing you to not be Agile. And that is the opposite of what a CEO should be doing. It's okay to have a budget for next year. And your budget for next year is based on some kind of big picture. This is what we think we might do, or this is all this is how much money we think we're going to need to be able to deliver what you want. Let's say you're trying to generate 10 million in sales. Well, we know based on history that's going to take at least $1 million in marketing. Okay, so that's our budget, $1 million, because we're trying to get 10 million in sales. Okay, that's how you should determine the next year's budget, based on what your sales are trying to be, not based on the actions that you're going to take. Then it should be up to you in the moment, every 2-week increments, or maybe even 4-week increments, to plan what you're actually going to spend the money on. And if your manager can't handle that, they need to go back to school.
Interesting. So you just get, I mean, I don't know if it's idealistic or not. I don't have the experience, but the way I imagine is that you get basically like a lump sum of a budget, and then you want to hire 10 in-house people, you go and do that. You want to hire 15 contractors, you go and do that. But it's up to you to decide. You just ask for the sheer resource money to be able to deliver that.
Yeah, and it's based on what you're trying to achieve, right? And now optimizing, I mean, obviously there are different levels of management, but let's think like VP or CMO level. You're responsible for the entire budget, so it should be up to you to optimize the use of that budget to deliver the results, and it shouldn't be up to your manager to micromanage that activity, right? And so you're trying to run your team as agile as you can. And let's take a different department, because I think we fixate on too much on marketing sometimes, and sales and engineering, but there are other departments in an organization. For example, there's also supply chain operations. So so in the case of supply chain, you're responsible for getting stuff shipped from one place to another, right? That's your ordering and logistics. That's what you do. And I know that STX Next doesn't have such a department, but many companies do. So how can you do that using agile? And the answer is back to measurement capability. If you can't measure how long it takes for you to ship things and how much money it takes to ship things, you can't optimize it. You can't properly plan it. And that's where, I know I'm going to talk about Mercado Labs, but that's what Mercado Labs can do for you. That's part of why I'm passionate about Mercado Labs, is because we're trying to make the Jira of supply chain, so that supply chain managers everywhere can now look and see, oh, this is how long it takes for when I place an order to when it gets manufactured, to when it gets on the boat, to when it arrives in the dock, to when it arrives at the warehouse. And now that I know this, I can plan properly. I can shorten my planning cycles. And why that's so important, Kuba, just to kind of put this all together, if you can shorten your planning cycles, then this shirt that I'm wearing right now, which is super fashionable, I'm sure, this shirt maybe isn't in fashion, in 6 months. But if I ordered them a year ago, I got to sell them anyway. But if I know my actual time from order to arrive at the warehouse is actually only, let's say, 3 months, including this ocean travel, then I can shorten my ordering cycle for which shirts to order to 3 months. So I won't over order this shirt, which is now no longer in fashion. That's what I'm talking about by agile. It's shortening your planning cycle by using actual real-time data, as much data as you can get, to see what the reality is in the situation. And if you can do those things, you can look at, you can get all that down. That's what it means to be agile as an organization.
Wow, amazing. And it's such an interesting note to kind of, well, we're slowly getting to the end of our slot. So I wanted to say end on. And I love the analogy that you used just now. It's really going to stick in my mind, I think, for a while longer. Wow. So thank you for sharing that. I was wondering if we were going to have time to touch upon this too, but I'm glad I asked that question. It was really illuminating. So now, do you have a couple extra minutes past the 1 hour mark, or do we need to kind of wrap this up really quickly?
Yeah, I got a few extra minutes.
Okay, that's good. Right. So I wanted to ask you just one last question before we get to kind of final announcements and thank yous and whatnot. So, obviously you have this huge wealth of experience, and I have this perpetual anxiety that I'm not going to ask my guests the right question to surface the best insights. So just to be sure, was there anything else that you maybe wanted to share with our audience today about building successful teams, successful startups, that I haven't asked about, that should have asked about, that you still wanted to share today?
I think you've asked amazing questions, and we've covered a lot of ground. So it would please me to no end if the one takeaway people had from this whole talk was, don't overinvest when you don't have customer feedback. I mean, at the end of the day, kind of started with that top tip about the MVP, but it really flows through the entire thing that I'm talking about. If you can't measure the effect of what you're doing, don't overinvest in it, right? Because whether that be supply chain, whether that be engineering effort, whether that be, what you're going to build or your product. You need to get that feedback, that 360 feedback, before you overinvest in any one thing. And that, to me, is really the trick to being successful at a startup. It's making things in small increments, measuring the impact, being able to optimize your dollars spent, because you don't have infinity dollars. You have to put every penny to the best work that you can, and to do that, you must measure its result. And that, to me, is the thing. I'll just keep beating that drum all day long. And honestly, I've not done it. In my book, I talk a lot about how I screwed that up, and what happened when I screwed that up, and I've screwed it up many times. But when I detect that and I fix it, it leads to success, right? It's the screw ups that lead to success.
Excellent. Yeah, I love that. And certainly it's an important note to have in mind. And I do also hope that a lot of the leaders, watchers, and listeners are going to take this away. Don't overinvest when you don't have customer feedback. It's extremely important. I can tell, at the very least, by how much it's come up on this very show. So, with that said, I suppose that brings us to the end of what we wanted to share today. I do feel like there's a lot more to discuss and maybe potential for a follow-up session, but not to get too ahead of ourselves. Harlan, thank you so much for everything that you shared today. I wanted to ask if you have any announcements for our audience. Do you want them to do something, click something, follow you, follow somebody else, something else? Now's the time to share about that, as we still have everybody's attention.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would love for anybody that's looking at international logistics to check out mercadolabs.com. It's our company, and it's what we're trying to do is bring this agile philosophy, this really extreme visibility and optimization capability and shortened planning cycles to the supply chain world and international importing and logistics. And also check out my book. So I mentioned it a couple of times. It's called Navigating Your Way to Startup Success. It's available at Amazon. Just search for my name, Harlan Beverly, or Navigating Your Way to Startup Success. You'll find it. You'll also find my other book, which I didn't even tell you about, Kuba, but now I feel like it's relevant. And it's called Lean Startings. And it's kind of a spin-off of the Lean Startup book, which is a great book by Eric Ries. It's called Lean Startup. Well, mine's called Lean Startings, and it's kind of like a branch from that, and it's written just like the goal. So it's written as a narrative, as a young man who's building his first startup, and it's you live through his journey, including a girlfriend, a heart attack, a new car, all the things that happen along the way. So that's a fun, short, easy read if you don't want to read like a more of a that's more of a fiction, whereas Navigating Your Way to Startup Success is my nonfiction book, but it's filled with, it's got 13 different startups stories in it that you can see how they failed and screwed up and what happened, and ultimately how those failures turned into success. And it's kind of a funny story, Kuba. I wanted to title the book "Failing Your Way to Startup Success," but my publisher, which is DeGruyter, they said no, it has to be. That's too negative. I'm like, but I'm a controversial person. I love saying like, I'm going to fire you. I like being controversial. And they're like, no, sorry, it won't sell. Rename it to Navigating Your Way. Instead of Failing Your Way, it should be Navigating Your Way to Startup Success. They're not wrong, but I wish we had called it Failing Your Way to Startup Success.
Well, now people know that story too, so maybe between themselves they're going to call it that. I love the idea of that second book, honestly, that you haven't spoken about earlier. That's that one. I love these narratives, as I mentioned, so I'll look into that. Certainly, on a personal level, just talking with you makes me want to start a startup, and I don't usually have these thoughts day to day. So this was hugely inspiring. So thank you for sharing all of that. I wanted to say for just 1 minute, for anybody who might be meeting STX Next through this session, you might be curious. I mean, Harlan, you've already mentioned a lot about what we do and the value we bring. But just to bring people up to speed, STX Next is the software development company that's the largest and we like to think best in Europe when it comes to Python software development. And we do so much more: Node.js, machine learning, DevOps, data engineering, design, and we're branching out into more and more things all the time. So if you've got a problem with your product not being built fast enough, or it's not good enough, or it's not scaling, or you're not sure where to take it next, then you can talk with STX Next. Go to stxnext.com. I did not mean for it to have that next in that previous sentence there, but it worked out fine. Go to stxnext.com to read about what we do. On the other hand, if you enjoyed this and you like Tech Leaders Hub and you want more of it, go to techleadershub.com. Sign up for our newsletter and you'll get informed about our sessions. You'll get links to the replays of previous sessions and some other great content for leaders and engineers around the web. And probably the best thing you can do is to follow STX Next on LinkedIn. This is the hub for all of our content, whether it's our blog content, our ebooks, or more Tech Leaders Hub sessions. You'll be seeing clips from previous sessions published regularly, also from this session coming up in a month or two as we clear our backlog of the previous sessions we've had over the last few months. So stxnext.com, techleadershub.com, follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube, and those are some of the things that you could do to stay in touch with us more, and we really appreciate that. With all of that said, we're already quite a bit past the 1 hour mark, so I guess we'll be saying our goodbyes here. Thank you so much, watchers and listeners, for tuning in today, especially to the ones who left comments. Really appreciate every one of you. Harlan, any last thoughts to share as we finish up the session?
Not for me. I'm super stoked to see what happens next with Mercado Labs, see what happens next with STX Next. You know, I've hired you guys multiple times for Python, and now I've hired you for Node twice as well. So I think you guys really have branched out, and you have a great program. And I love the FTE concept that you guys bring. You guys become part of our Scrum team. That's what I love. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. And thank you all for your time. Thank you, Harlan, for being our guest. This was an incredibly pleasant conversation. Unfortunately, I have to click end broadcast now. That's what I'm going to do. We'll see you next time. Next Tech Leaders Hub is on Monday. Look it up on LinkedIn, STX Next on LinkedIn. You'll see the next Tech Leaders Hub session. Okay, thank you. That's all for today. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.